Welcome to the Pulse Experience, the podcast that takes you on a journey of wellness at the intersection of technology and human experience. I'm your host, Edward Beltran, CEO of Fierce and innovator of Pulse. Stress is a very large problem today. It's costing organizations $300 billion annually, not to mention the impact on our people and the individuals in our companies. And often we don't know what's causing our stress. And if we do, we don't know the proper, most impactful way to handle it. Instead, we're used to just accepting stress and managing it at a general level, such as with better diet, better sleep, exercise, or meditation. But this doesn't get underneath the root issues of our stress or eliminate them. And today, there's so much that's required of us at both our homes and the workplace that we don't always have the tools to be able to be self-aware and tackle these stressors. However, our bodies, they don't lie. They tell us constantly what's happening. They're responding to our environments, and it's our job to listen. And when we handle these challenges and take them head on, they drive positive results in both our personal and our professional lives. Pulse is our proprietary app that integrates wearable devices and infuses cutting-edge science to be able to show you who you're with and where you're at when you're experiencing stress by the hour. Then we wrap context around these events by pulling in calendar and GPS data to be able to further drive that self-awareness. And more importantly, move into action with either a live coach or the in-app AI bot to be able to tackle these stressors, drive your resilience higher, as well as the outcomes you desire in your lives. We call this biometric intelligence. Our certified coaches walk into every coaching session with these same biometric data and insights to be able to help you identify the themes that are going to have the most impact on your lives and tackle those toughest challenges. This transformation is the Pulse Experience.
Hello, everyone. I'm Edward Beltran, CEO of Fierce and innovator of Pulse, and you're joining us on the Pulse Experience podcast. And today we're joined by the great Joe Parent, who's our head of learning, master facilitator, as well as a Pulse certified coach. And today, Joe has an amazing story about one of his coachee and a situation that many of us can relate to. He took on a new job. It sounded great in theory. When he got in there, he noticed that he's not quite happy. So the challenge is what accountability did you have in that situation to understand your dissatisfaction? But more importantly, what do you do about it? Joe, let's take a deep dive on this. Tell us a little bit about your coachee to kick it off.
So it was fascinating because when you just said, Ed, that's familiar to a lot of us. A lot of what I was hearing from him, I had similar experiences. So there was that connection right away, but I obviously didn't. I wanted to focus on him. So this is a person that had been in a role. And the other thing is that he's also in a similar industry in terms of learning and development. So our backgrounds were similar. He had a role in a large company, a multinational. In fact, he lived abroad for them for a while. This role that he's been in, as you said, for under a year, it's a smaller organization. And so his thought was, this is great. This is going to enable me to own some things and make some things happen. It was a promotion from his perspective. And quickly he recognized that there's a difference in going from a big ocean to a small pond because there's limitations, right? You don't have the same level of resources. You're likely going to be a player coach, right? You're going to have to get in there and get your hands dirty and do some things, as well as, even though you've got the title, it doesn't mean you have the freedom to just make things happen. You still have to influence people. It may be a higher level of influence. So all of those things I could see playing out. I don't think that he might have seen them, but was ignoring them. So what showed up as we were talking, this is somebody at a director level position. He quickly shifted from where he was playing clearly to his strengths in his prior role, wasn't able to play to as many of those strengths in this smaller role because he was having to do things that he wasn't accustomed to, that didn't play to those strengths. I mean, you're multifaceted, right? And so what started to show up, and I went into this, by the way, because, is with this as a coach for folks that wear Pulse app, I have a dashboard. I can take a look at some of their data. I can go in prepared, just as they can kind of see what are some of those pain points. I can see some of the, at least showing up, where he's spiking. What was interesting was these were overnight. So these were while he was sleeping, and that was pretty consistent, And so as I started to coach, it surfaced for him. He said, I'm not really sure what's going on, but I'd like to get some good sleep. So that was a good indication, right? So then I, through our coaching process, was asking him some questions. And so trying to determine where his immediate dissatisfaction was, it was with his role. And he quickly got to with his boss, who was a senior executive level member of the team. And so he started to talk about, I'm getting micromanaged. This person that was giving me some flexibility early on, I have less flexibility. She's demanding some deadlines and some timing and some plans. Imagine that. All things that we need to do. And he was recognizing, he was self-aware, said, I've been procrastinating. I've been missing deadlines, and so he's aware of his performance. And of course, you can appreciate that. I report to you. If I were to miss some deadlines, if you started to notice some procrastinating, you would absolutely be on the phone saying, Joe, where's this? Where's this? Because you should, right? You shouldn't have to, but if you don't see it, you should get there. We approached this, and I was asking him some questions about what was going on and what kinds of conversations he was having with his manager about this, And he admitted he wasn't really having conversations. He was avoiding her because she was requiring some things. And so he started to go down this path of, maybe this isn't the job for me. I kind of took this because I wanted to relocate. I wanted to be closer to home, right? Taking into account what his needs were, because as I said, he had lived abroad a bit and he wanted to be closer to home for all kinds of personal reasons necessary. And so even just the motivation, I think he might have squeezed himself into this place to make it fit. And yet there he could see the potential upside, right? Because given some freedom in this smaller organization to make things happen, if he were to take control and decide to take action in terms of making those plans to inform his leader what is possible versus just sitting back in a more passive role, there's a huge upside, and it would require him making a decision, right? Does he want to be here, or does he not want to be here? Does he want to take action to make the end result that he wants, or does he want to instead go to another pond, if you will, to keep with that metaphor?
Yeah.
Swim in a different ocean, maybe.
For sure.
I'm going to pause for a second, because usually you're curious. So what kinds of questions are you surfacing?
Yeah, no, I think this is really interesting, Joe, and there's many factors here at play. So just to rehash, you had a coachee who was at a larger organization that went to a smaller organization. So that variable in and of itself is a driver for change and anxiety. So, Joe, when you were describing what he was going through, I was like, hey, Joe, are you talking about your coachee or you're talking about yourself, right? Because you kind of went through the same thing, right? Yeah. And we'll get into this a little bit later, but there's pluses and minuses to either scenario, big company, small company, right? Decisions that I made and you made, Joe, as well. And, I think being self-aware on why you're making those decisions is really important to drive toward a situation that ultimately you're happy in, as well as your strengths. The other variable that's interesting here is he was with that company for a long time. So unconsciously, he was able to form fit himself into a spot that was comfortable. He was known, you used the word strengths. So obviously he was playing through his strengths. So taking away bigger company to smaller company, making the change to any other company, there's going to be an adjustment, right? Between finding how you fit into there, how you're displaying your strengths, building your relationship to your boss. So that's another variable, right? And then the other one that you mentioned as well, which is really interesting, is when he prioritized his choices for why he chose this organization. I didn't hear necessarily the top choices were role and strengths. It was around location and supporting of lifestyle decisions, which is great. It's totally fine. But if you prioritize or consciously prioritize those higher, there's going to be trade-offs, right? And so now the end result, if I'm hearing you correctly, he's in the role. And this is where reality meets, where the rubber meets the road with reality, and saying, wow, like something's happening here. So this is absolutely fascinating. And what you're saying, Joe, is that it's manifesting at night. So he's not sleeping. His fours are spiking up. This is absolutely incredible. Joe, let's walk through a little bit more in detail about how you helped him drive the self-awareness, because as I opened up, there's many different variables here at play. So before you get to solution, how did you drive to the self-awareness? How did you help him?
Yeah. So you actually zoomed in on where the kind of the epiphany started to become aware for this individual, which was I was a known entity in this other organization. I have this track record of experience. Why doesn't this organization that I'm a part of now, why don't they see that? This is what I was hired for because I was able to deliver this. This should follow me. And I think that was the first awareness of this burn, because I asked the three-word question: how do you know? And how do they know? Right. So how do they know? How do you know that this has followed you? How do they know that you've had these successes? Right. You have it on your resume, sure, when you interview for a role, but that was then, this is now. So what have you done? It's almost the question from the manager's perspective, his supervisor, even his organization. What have you done for me lately? So that's great. We hired you because you had this experience, but what have you done here? And that, I think, is where he had the awareness. Because in the asking those kinds of questions, what have you shown them? What are the results that you have currently provided that would lead them to see all of the things that you're able to bring? What are the, what is it that you're asking for of your leader that you're not getting? And the answer was, well, I'm not asking. I'm not taking control here. I'm reacting to the way that I'm being received. Mm-hmm. And so that was that other awareness is he was on his heels. He was reacting. He was, in our language, from a fierce accountability perspective, he was taking a very passive role. He took the locus of control and absolutely placed it in the lap of his manager. And then it was impacting his behavior, right? Because the emotions that he was feeling, the frustration, was driving his behaviors, which was becoming more passive. And then his results were all kind of in this negative vortex of a spiral. And so just asking that question, which was geared towards having him think about what he's done and what he's actively done, I could see him suddenly aware of, yeah, I've got some control here that I've given up. I could take back some control here. Where he entered, I think, this conversation, Ed, was he was thinking, I just need to jump. I'm not happy here. I'm not getting what I want. It's not like what I've been through before. These are things that he didn't say, but I could sense this. So my choice here is to just leave. And then I think through more conversation and questioning, because the question asked is, what's going to be different at that next organization? How will you be different, and how will you get different results? And I think the awareness was however he's gotten himself here in this organization is likely to follow him if he tries to do the same thing, just in a different place, but expect different results.
I love that word that you used, vortex, because many of us have found ourselves in that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So as soon as he told himself the story of, and we all do it, right? So it's no knock on your coach. I picked the wrong job, or the job description was misleading. As soon as he said that, he's giving himself that out, if you will, right? And when you accept that, there's only one path. And that's that vortex that you're describing, versus let me stand back and let me truly analyze what's happening here and be self-aware on, and Joe, as I'm sure you'll say, where's my DNA on this? And more importantly, what do I do? Right. So I want to focus on that a little bit more, because I think that's so important. So please continue, Joe.
Yeah, that's the money question, Ed. What have you done to get yourself here? And that was the one that really had him kind of wake up and say, okay, so I have taken some action. The other way I'll describe what you just said, that vortex that sometimes we experience ourselves in, it's a soothing fable, right? We tell ourselves these soothing fables to make us recognize that, yeah, I'm in a place that I'm not comfortable. I'm not happy here. And the soothing fable is, it's because of them. It's because of it. It's because of the conditions. It's all of this finger pointing to the outside of ourselves. To do the work through, a conversation with a coach, so I give him credit. He was wanting to do the work by having a conversation with a coach to really examine what's at the core here, and then recognizing the epiphany, the awareness through the question of what have you done to get yourself here? Well, I've fallen into an old trap. I've stopped performing. I've become victim to my situation. I have, faced with a manager that I perceive to be micromanaging. I've let them micromanage me, and I haven't had the hard conversations with them around why I'm dissatisfied or what I've done to get myself here. And so that, I think, was the recognition of, I've given away control through my own actions. I now have a new result that I can take control of. I could grab the steering wheel back for my own future, and through a couple of choices can decide what my future would look like. And so that was fascinating. And also in these conversations, just as you and I are now, to just watch that body language change. It was from a dejected, I'm out the door, I've already made my decision, I'll go through this exercise with you right now, to the awareness of, there's a different path here. I may not have to go through well, let's face it, changing organizations is a disruption, right? It's not always, because you never know what you're going to get when you go to someplace else. And to recognize that he's in this organization that drew him here, cool organization in his own words, had a great mission, great vision, great go-to-market strategy that he wanted to be a part of. And now he's recognizing that if he behaves differently, he could be a huge player in that organization, but he's going to have to do some work.
I love that word where you said huge player, because I think that's something that is vastly overlooked, especially when we talk to people about cultures. They talk about this like it's some abstract thing, right? Like it's in stone temple somewhere, right? Written in hieroglyphics or something like that. But what people don't realize is that they are the culture, right? And when you accept that and you say it's how we interact or we don't interact, it's so empowering, because he is an individual, when you go into that context and say, I can influence this culture, right? I can make a real difference. I really love that. And so, Joe, before we pivot into the actual actions, I think where you're going is he's going to have that conversation with his manager. I think that's where you're going, Joe. But I also want to reiterate, though, how important it is that we clear our context. Now, that's 2 words, but it's very powerful. Clear your context. So he's already been telling us this story for a year, let's just say. It's already ingrained. It's already his out, right? We as human beings, right, obviously look for the path of least resistance to relieve our, how we feel about certain things, right? And so he's already come up with the story that I heard you say, where he's being micromanaged. He picked the wrong organization. It wasn't what he thought. But these are already ingrained thoughts. It's not like he thought about it and woke up the next day and said, hey, here I am. These are ingrained thoughts that he's been thinking about every day, right? Telling his significant other and other people. So how do you pivot out of that, Joe? And what is the actions that you coached him in to do next?
The first question was, what have you done to get yourself here? And then we talk about, let's paint the picture of the ideal future state. So let's imagine that you and I were going to talk, a few months down the road. And if everything had played itself out, you were in a much better place, much happier. What would that look like? What would be going on? And he painted a wonderful picture in this organization. I'd be playing to my strengths. I'd have other people that were able to do the things that I'm not as great at, that don't fuel me, that don't make me thrive. And so then I asked a question, because I could see where this was potentially going. And I said, because one of the next questions is, what are you going to do to get yourself there? So I paused on that one first, because I wanted to ask him, if you were your manager, if the roles were reversed and you were sitting in your manager's seat, what would you do if you were sitting there with respect to you? And he started to recognize, exactly what she's doing. I'm not seeing the results that I wanted to get. So I'd start to look a little bit closer, and I'd want to get more into the weeds of what's going on, because, he was hired with this expectation of building this program that he had done before, that he's perfectly capable of. It just, in this small organization, took him, he'd have to do more of what he might have had other people doing. So he recognized, no fault of, it's not really about her. It's really about him recognizing where he is now, where he can play, where he can make some decisions, where he has freedom to create some things, and where his boundaries are. And that didn't exist. And so I think by imagining himself sitting in managing himself, and then recognizing, where he was missing some conversations with his leader, it went down to the solution of our delegation model, which is, you have all of these responsibilities in your job. And are you clear on where you can make some decisions? And are you aligned with your manager? If you were to have this conversation with them where you can clearly own making a decision, take action, and either don't share because you own it completely, or that you have to have ongoing conversations so that that person is kept aware. And that was the money answer. And it's so nice because with our app, all of our materials are right there. And I could just have him open up his app. And I said, go through to delegate, search for delegate, take a look. And I walked him through. He'd never been through the session before, but it's so nice because it's simple, not simplistic. And he was able to understand all the different levels of where he could have ownership, look at where his role responsibility, put himself in each one of those different categories of where he believed he had the freedom to make some decisions and take action. And then I said, imagine having that conversation. Would your manager put you in those same buckets? He didn't know. Maybe, maybe not. I said, imagine if you both were aligned and you were both very clear on where you have the freedom to take action and where you don't. How freeing would that be for you? How likely could that help you get to this ideal future state that you just imagined? And the answer was clear to him. That's his first step, to have that conversation, get the clarity, get the alignment, and then start to build the thing that he's been wanting to, but he's been procrastinating on for all kinds of reasons. Again, because of what you said, those limiting getting in the spin, the negative vortex, the context that he'd set for himself, the story he'd already told and bought into. And he was starting to write a new story for himself as we were closing out our conversation. It's pretty exciting to watch.
Yeah, that's amazing, Joe. And our delegation model is very powerful. It gives you a clear structure of discussion around responsibility and ownership around, your job and your job scope, with the idea that it increases over time, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that, Joe? Because I think it's an important aspect of the model.
Years ago, I know that we talked about having this, be a development tool as well, probably development even more than delegation, because within the structure, if you think of a tree, right, and you start at that root level, I'm probably never going to delegate those decisions to you because either I'm still working on them myself and I want to hold on to them, or sometimes those are more strategic decisions that multiple people have to make. So I can't really delegate those. So that's there. Go up to the trunk level decisions. Those are the ones that might be new to you. So here's a decision that I want you to start to take some ownership on. Make a decision, which is a little bit more strong than recommend what you would do. Decide as if you had carte blanche here. And then before you take action, I want to talk with you about that. I want to get a sense for your decision-making process. I want to get a sense for what information are you paying attention to before you take this action. And then I'll give you freedom to go and take some action. Now, as you show a pattern of excellent decision-making and behavior, I could move you up with that same thing to a branch level and say, okay, great. You've shown this pattern of excellence. Now you're at the branch level, which means make those decisions, take some action, and then you and I will discuss on a regular basis, whether it's our monthly or weekly one-on-one, so I can keep track and also maybe provide you with some more information that you may not have or that you may not have considered. Ultimately getting you up to the leaf level decision, which is, man, you've shown excellence in this. Even where you've stumbled, you've known how to course correct and make some better decisions. So now moving you up to the leaf level, which means you own this. Make the decision, take action. I don't even need to know. I trust you fully in this. And if you want to let me know so I can, praise you and recognize absolutely, I'd love to know that. And so you can see within that model, you can see that within the same role, right? There's that progression. I'm developing within my own role. And also the idea that these are the size of the decision doesn't really matter, because big decisions, I probably am going to start you at the trunk level and watch you move up. Small decisions, I still may want to see that success. It may do the same thing. And so it doesn't really matter the level of decision making. It's just the clarity of how successful could you be in it? Because I, as a leader, want to make sure that I set you up for success. So I might start you out with a little bit of guidance and a little bit more handholding until I see that pattern of success. Just one last thing on the model too. It's interesting because sometimes when a manager takes over a team, a new team, like the manager is the one that's new and the team has been there for a while. Sometimes managers take everybody back down to that trunk or branch level, which can cause some disruption, right? Because it shows that, wait, why aren't you not trusting us? And so, managers, it's important for managers to be very clear on why they're doing that, so that it might be about their learning. They recognize that they're the ones that's new here. I have to understand what you're doing. It's not about your performance. It's about me and my need to be able to manage effectively. So we'll get back there. But for me, this is what we need. And without the conversation, that's where we run into trouble, right? That's where people would leave.
Joe, that was amazing. And I hope the audience is following along, not just with Joe's passion, but the power of what he laid out. I know it was a lot of detail, but this is the power of it, because instead of a manager just dictating or sending out directives, do XYZ, or someone receiving XYZ, it's a conversation, and it really focuses around the why. And through those conversations, you get a good grounding on where you're at. And sometimes what you thought might change a little bit, but that's with the power of having a conversation and understanding the why. Here's why I'm thinking about this. Here's the reason why. And someone will say, well, here's some other additional information that you might not have had. And you're like, great, let's make some adjustments, right? So that's the power.
Yeah.
It's a win-win for both the manager and the employee who are enriching the relationship, but also too the impact and quality of work. So Joe, talk to us about what happened to your coachee. So he has this conversation, he uses the delegate model, he connects with his manager with the idea of clearing his context and enriching the relationship, what happened?
Yeah. So he stayed. So he's still there, and he's taken control of the path forward. And so what I could see behind the scenes, because he was still wearing his wearable, and he was still tracking his through the pulse app, and I watched those high spikes, consistent spikes of forwards overnight starting to reduce. So, initially it was about 25% less. And then over time, he's continued to reduce his stress. And I presume, I haven't had the direct conversation with him, but I presume better night's sleep, right? Which is the goal. This is what we're looking for. And this is why people want to kind of get their stressors and their large and small, micro and macro stressors under control, have some understanding of what's going on, taking control and making better outcomes. And it's what he did for himself.
Fantastic work, Joe. That's just absolutely amazing. I would love for us to have future sessions. We don't have enough time on this one, but a session dedicated to job dissatisfaction, because as you know, Joe, it's a big ball, right, of issues and things that can be dissected in a very organized way that's driven by self-awareness. And you touched upon some of the themes here that are so important around what your DNA is, right? How you participated in this, but more importantly, what does an ideal look like and how you get there? We've been successfully helping people figure that out very quickly. And one of the things I want to emphasize is, and we touched upon this because we hear this a lot in misplaced stress. We hear this a lot on this podcast of sleepless nights. I've even raised my hand, Joe, and said I've had the same, right? And instead of enduring that uncomfortableness, instead of enduring that anxiety, it's really actively saying why, what's happening. And many times what's behind it is unknowns, uncertainty that you're unwilling to address. And the amazing thing that we've seen, and I could testify to this, is how quickly that pressure is released when you hit that release valve, just by asking the question, simple question, I didn't understand this. I'm really confused. Let's walk through this, right? The models that we develop work phenomenally for feedback from front, for delegation. And behind that is really saying, let's talk about this, right? And what we find, Joe, which I found, is how quickly you get to that resolution, the stress, the pressure valve opens up, and you really go in the direction of where you intended, where you've always wanted to be. And it's really that quick, right? I'm sure you've seen that as well, Joe, many times.
Absolutely. And there's also that message of, how did I get myself here? Because if I'm giving away the control and I want to have some control back, I've got to do some things. And it's just fascinating. So again, you talked about job dissatisfaction. That's easy to say, you aren't treating me the way that I want to be. And yet, if I'm aware enough, I could say, what have I done to have you treat me this way? And what do I need to do differently to be treated the way that I want to? It's all about, there's a lot to be said about locus of control.
Another episode, Joe, I think we focus on that. And again, the underlying point here is that it's not binary of, let me just leave this job, because these issues follow you. And I've said this story before, but this is the power, this is the passion, this is the love of where I connected with Fierce, and what Susan Scott has written is because when I was looking for this opportunity, of course, I was reading the book, and the one sentence that said, what to the tune of, what conversation or conversations did you miss to get here? Like the light bulb absolutely went off. And I said, wait a second. Yeah, because the prior opportunity I was looking to leave was, there was problems, but I was a leader. I was expected to influence that culture, that impact, right? Leaving was not the wrong decision, but that sentence made me look at what I was leaving in a completely different context that changed my trajectory as a leader, Joe. So Joe, as always, fantastic conversation. Love having you on. Great impacts on your Coachee. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Me
Thank
too,
you,
Ed.
everyone.
Thanks for that.
All right.
Be well.